This has been sort of a heartbreaking day for me in one sense, and yet a joyous day. I've seen two great things. I've seen devastation on a scale that I've rarely seen. I was in the Korean War in the sense that I visited the Korean troops during the war for several weeks at a time, and then I was 3 times in Vietnam. And then I was in India when the great tidal wave hit India. And I was there, and I called the president of India, and I said, would you let me have a helicopter? I'd just been with him, and we'd been an acquaintance for some time. I'd seen him twice. And he gave me a helicopter, and they flew me in there. And 25,000 people had been killed by this tidal wave and the wind. And the bodies were up in the bushes and the trees everywhere, in their beautiful saris. And they were bringing prisoners in to burn the bodies because of the odor that was already beginning. And I'd been through all of that and many other things I could tell you. But today I saw something, I think, on a scale greater than any of those. You have to go way out in the country, and you have to go out the coast, as the governor was kind enough to take me today, and my son, Franklin. He just left because he wants to escape the weather that's on the way. He flies his own plane, and he's going to Tennessee, and then the next day he has to go to Vietnam. And he's going to Vietnam, I don't know what for, but he goes all over the world continually. One day he's in Africa, and one day he's in India, and he's so forth. But when Hugo hit, for the first time in the history of his organization, he decided to try to do something to help the people in this area. And so he came down here, and some of his associates came with him. And he made contact with Bill Dean and different others, and they decided that they would go to one of the poorer areas and bring in trailers and things like that, and mobile homes, which they've done, and we saw some of them today. And then the Salvation Army that Captain Worthy represents. I was with them in California, because then from Little Rock I went to California because the Salvation Army had invited me to speak at a banquet to raise a lot of money for homeless people, and they raised that night $750,000 net. And so we had quite an interesting affair there that night. And then about that time, the earthquake hit, Hugo. And so the Salvation Army said, would you go to Northern California and help us up there and go visit the people and go to the towns and villages that have not been in the news, that had been hit pretty hard. And so I went up there. And it was interesting how many of the policemen and how many of the mayors of these towns would ask me to lead in a prayer. And their thoughts had turned to God. And I remember when Hugo hit here, one of the national station networks had a woman, a black woman in this city, and they asked her what her thoughts were. She said God was walking around here last night. And I think there's some truth in that. A God of mercy, a God of love, and a God of forgiveness. But also, I remember one night on the Dan Rather's news program on CBS, one lady was asked about the thing, and she said, well, God was just pressing down on us. And time after time I heard the name God used on various programs that you don't hear God used too often. And so I think our minds and our hearts did turn to God, both in South Carolina and in California. And it seemed that both coasts felt the impact, a spiritual impact. And many people have asked me, why do these things happen? Why does God do this? And why does God allow this? I don't have the answer to that. But I want to read a passage in Hebrews, the 12th chapter, beginning with verse 26. Whose voice then shook the earth, but now he had promised, saying, yet once more I shake not only the earth, but also heaven. And this word, yet once more, signifieth the removing of those things that are shaken, as of things that are made. That those things which cannot be shaken, like the river that was read about in the 46th Psalm a moment ago, cannot be moved. Wherefore we, receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. God is saying here that sometime he's going to shake the whole world and the heavens. And when that great shaking comes, there'll be things that'll be destroyed, but there'll be some things that remain. And we saw even in the homes and the buildings today, many things had been carried away, blown for blocks. Very difficult to believe that a whole house can be picked up and moved as far as we saw that some of them had been moved. And yet there were some things that remained. There would be another house a short distance away that, at least from outward appearance, had not been touched. Why? And many people ask that question when this type of thing happens. And I'm sure that many of you have asked that. We're living in an increasingly dangerous world and a changing world. I watched the news tonight, and I saw the story coming from Germany of those East Germans by the thousands that are crossing the border. And then last year, my wife and I were in China, and we toured Eastern China, and I was allowed to speak at the universities and the Academy of Social Sciences and the Academy of Scientists, and no clergyman had spoken to them in a number of years, never dreaming what was about to happen, that an earthquake was about to shake China, the likes of which China has perhaps never known since the days when Mao Zedong took over China. But out of it all came blessings. There's a spirit of revival in China. There's a spirit of revival in Western Europe that we haven't seen. I've been preaching in Western Europe ever since 1944. And we've seen tremendous changes, and we've seen Western Europe turn secular and materialistic, but we're seeing a turning back toward God now. We held a crusade 2 or 3 years ago in Paris in their great new stadium. It was filled every night, and when I gave the invitation, people would come to make their commitment to Christ. And then just the last day of July, the 31st of July, we were in Budapest. And I told some of the clergy today about how that stadium was filled. It's the second largest stadium in Eastern Europe. It was filled to overflowing. It broke all records for any event in that great stadium. And then when they looked on their turnstiles, they found that it broke the record by about 17,000. There were 115,000 people attended that meeting when I gave the invitation to receive Christ, and the Politburo was on the platform. The Roman Catholic Cardinal had led the prayer and read the scripture. The head of the Lutheran Church, the head of the Reformed, the Presbyterian Church was there. And they were all working together. And out of that togetherness, they had brought trainloads of people from all over Hungary and parts of Czechoslovakia and even Romania. And they packed that stadium and made history. And when I gave the invitation to receive Christ, 27,000 people came. People hungry for God. People searching for God all over the world. And in the midst of all these changes, there's some things that remain. The nature of God remains. God never changes. It's hard for me to believe and hard for me to accept that God is from everlasting to everlasting. But God never changes. And there are many people that feel that today that the great question that young people are asking is, what is meaning? Albert Camus said a quarter of a century ago, man cannot live without meaning. And people today say to themselves, I must suffer. We all suffer in our own way. It may be a broken marriage. It may be children that are disobedient. It may be something wrong in school or in business. And then people say, I must struggle. I have to suffer, but I must struggle. I'm at the mercy of chance. I feel guilty. Who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? Where am I going? What is the purpose and meaning of life? That's the big question today. And those people in Eastern Europe are searching desperately, and in China, for that answer. And they're doing it here in this country. And you are going to be searching even more than ever before Because you see, Hugo has not ended. Hugo came and did the devastation in a relatively short time, but the after effects are going to be a long time. You go to some of these villages and towns that we went to today and look at that coast, it'll be a long time before it's all rebuilt. It's going to be rebuilt. The spirit of the people of South Carolina and your leadership here has amazed me and thrilled me. And I don't think the people across the country have yet understood what happened here. They were all out at that ball game in California. All the press was out there, and of course they played that up because the hundreds of newspaper people were already there. But they came to the center of Charleston, and that's great. And Charleston was hit, but not quite like some of the places I think we saw today. We just came from Folly Beach, where I went as a boy. And some of these other places, and Sullivan's Island, and Isle of Palms, and up the coast to Myrtle Beach. And all these places have been devastated by Hurricane Hugo. And it's going to take all that you can do and the federal government can do. But the thing that thrills you is how people are working together. There's a working together on a scale perhaps you've never seen. There's an ecumenism among the churches in facing the devastation of Hugo. There's the working together of government, both federal and city, and the volunteer organizations that came in here, the Red Cross and the Salvation Army, and Samaritan's Purse, and many other organizations, the Southern Baptist, the wonderful work they've done here. And all of these groups have worked and prayed and believed, and I believe out of all these ashes and all of this devastation, you're going to see a new spirit and a new Charleston and a new southern South Carolina, southeastern South Carolina. Yes, Jesus said, and there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon, and upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity. That word distress means to be pressed from all sides. The word perplexity means no way out. There'll come a day when you will be pressed, and seemingly there'll be no way out but one. That one is the one that said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh to the Father but by me. And out of this devastation will come many people who will turn to Christ. I asked the head of the department that handles religion in China, I asked him why the Christians were growing so fast during the Cultural Revolution in China. And he said, we persecuted him. He was a communist leader. And he said, we found that the more we persecuted and the more trouble they had, the faster they grew. And he said, we're going to quit persecuting them. And because the Christians had grown from 750,000 to 50 million in just a short time under the terrible persecution of the Cultural Revolution. And that story could be repeated over and over and over again in Eastern Europe and in this country. I believe that people on the West Coast and East Coast of the United States are ready to listen to the gospel today as perhaps they haven't been ready to listen in a long time. And I remember once I was in college and I had a very bad spell of discouragement, and I wrote to my mother about it. She lived near Charlotte. And I remember that she wrote me back and she said, son, when the fog comes in and when the clouds move in, reach up by faith, and you'll find God's hand is already there. And you're worried about the future? Remember, God is already in the future. He's waiting for you. God bless you. It's been a great blessing to me and an inspiration to be here today in South Carolina. And I deeply appreciate the governor inviting me here to participate and to see a little bit of what we had read about and heard about and prayed about. And that 46th Psalm that you read, sir, is the psalm my wife and I read the morning after Hugo hit. And so it was very appropriate for me to hear it again. Thank you, and God bless you.